Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified privacy professional and provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there is greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our new best-selling book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. You ready for some fun today?
You know, I should have brought the pirate hat up for you to wear on today's show.
Oh, that's a good point.
I know.
Or we might be talking a little Star Wars. You could have brought some of your Star Wars toys.
Okay, then. Yes, they're hanging out on my desk, but enough.
But let's introduce our fun guest today. We have Beatrice Botti, who is the VP of Global Data and Privacy Officer at DoubleVerify. After an academic career in the EU and the US, she took up a role as a contracts attorney that quickly evolved into a privacy role at a wellness and well-being company. Can't wait to learn more. Beatrice, we're so excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, so we have to dive in. How did we go from a contract attorney that moved into privacy at wellness and well-being, and now you're playing a very active role in privacy and a big part of the advertising ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, if you asked my husband, he would tell you that I was born to work in privacy, but it was definitely not the original plan. When I was in law school, it wasn't really a career path that was talked about. I think it's a little bit more talked about now, although it's really some schools have courses, but it's still not a major investment that law schools are making, which is kind of interesting because there are a lot of opportunities out there. But I'd gone to law school in Europe and I'd gone to law school here in Boston. And the plan was for me to go into IP, hopefully patent litigation. That was really my plan. And I graduated and I was on a student visa and I couldn't really get a job. So, I ended up getting another degree actually in sport management, totally unrelated, while I was waiting for my green card. And when I finally had my green card and I had, a work permit, I started looking for a job and I got this staff attorney role at a company called Virgin Pulse, which is part of the Virgin umbrella. And they were looking for someone to do NDAs, basic contracting. And then a few months in, they were like, oh, there's this GDPR thing happening. We don't really know what it is. And there wasn't really much of a plan for it. And it was kind of a conversation that evolved in this direction. Well, Beatrice went to law school in Europe, so she must know what it is. I was like, that's a leap, but I can probably read it. And then it just became, I guess, to my husband's point, I am a very private person myself. So I feel like I had a kinship with the topic and it just worked out. I always tell people it just kind of worked out.
That's so interesting because I am a huge health and wellness fan. And in researching when I was going through some different career paths a while ago, had come across actually that very company and really thought what they were doing was really interesting. And then decided, well, I really like health and wellness, but I think I'll keep that as the hobby and I'll go into privacy full time. So it's kind of fun.
It's a very cool company, and it has an interesting focus because it really looks at making employees and their dependents healthier so that, in a country like the United States, especially where costs of receiving healthcare can get interesting, it becomes important to really focus on prevention. So, when I went in, I had no idea what they did because, even doing research at the time, the website didn't really explain it that well. So I remember when I then interviewed for the job here at DoubleVerify, which again is like a measurement company in the ad tech industry, you kind of have to be in the ad tech industry to know what it is that they do. It's not exactly average knowledge. But I remember talking about it and someone was like, well, do you feel like this is going to be like a big leap? Are you like scared of like making the change? And I was like, look, when I started Virgin Pulse, I had no idea what they did. Like I distinctly remember walking into my first day and being like, I guess today I learned about what the company does. And here I was like, I know ads exist. So I'm like, I felt like I had a much better handle of what was happening.
Well, I always think if you can learn content, you can learn, that type things, but basic skills, those are a little, in specific skills, those are a little bit harder to teach.
Yeah.
Well, Beatrice, I wanted to follow up, and this is kind of a question for both of you and Jody. You said, hey, they said I was from the, Europe. What's this GDPR about? But I mean, both you and Jody, and even when I've had to look at GDPR, we all had to start from somewhere. It's something that's brand new. And even though that makes it sound mysterious, what are both of your thoughts if someone's out there thinking, I want to be in a privacy career? Obviously, the both of you figured it out in spades. So, what is it that the two of you would be able to tell our audience about, don't be scared to get in there and dive in the deep end on privacy?
Well, I'm going to offer it to our fancy guest here first.
Well, in that case, I'm going to so I actually spent some time reflecting on whether or not it was a good idea for me to take on that project because I was really worried because I was like, man, if you screw this up, this is a big deal. It's, hundreds of $1 million in revenue kind of company. Like you can't really do it wrong. So I called the person that I always call when I don't know what to do, which is my dad. And I was like, I don't know if this is a good idea. And he was like, well, how many years of experience does someone who's been a lawyer for 30 years have in GDPR? And I was like, I don't know. It's a new law. And he was like, then you have the same amount of experience. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure that's how it works. But I'll go with it. So I usually credit him for being the one that pushed me over the edge.
He was your master Yoda?
He was my master Yoda. He was like, do or do not. There is no try.
I think that's true. I mean, if you think about it, if it hadn't been GDPR and it had been some other topic, it's the same, right? Every new law is brand new and everyone is having to figure out how to do that. We're not going to talk about this too much at the moment, but we could talk about AI and what's transforming the industry. That's all new. Everyone has to figure it out. So I had a very similar philosophy, and I know we're going to dive into the states a little bit. It's the same thing here. We have brand new state laws. You're not going to find too many Colorado privacy experts. It's brand new. Yeah. Continuing to get drafted as we speak.
Well, even GDPR, it's been like, going on 6 years and they're still trying to figure out what applies to what and how. And, every time there's a new like DPA decision, it's like, well, you can't do targeted advertising based on contractual obligations. They're like, okay, well, can we do it it feels like we're just trying every option. So, trial and error.
So, Beatrice, it's funny. I just came back from a conference where I was speaking on cybersecurity. But even though I'm speaking on cybersecurity, we started talking about privacy. And the professionals in the room really weren't aware of the fact we have like 5 laws. So from your perspective, what are the biggest privacy challenges that our companies are facing as we talk right now in January 2023?
Mm-hmm. I think the challenge is the laws. The United States is a cluster of independent governments that decide to work together. So the way they draft laws is very independent one from the other. I was at the IAPP conference last year, and I think the Attorney General of Colorado was there, and he was talking about how Attorney General offices make efforts to coordinate, the drafting and interpretation of the law. And I was like, do they? Because it's all different words, and we're all confused by what sharing or sale or targeted advertising versus behavioral advertising. Are they different? Are they the same? Everybody's defining them their own way. So I think the biggest challenge, especially for smaller companies, is to just figure out how do you baseline all of them, right? Instead of having 15 different compliance frameworks. Because especially if you work in tech or you rely on the internet, borders aren't really a thing. So like the degree of certainty that you can have that this person is in Colorado is relatively limited. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. I know that was the biggest challenge when I was at my old company. It's a big challenge here because, we don't have the budgets of some of the big tech companies that can have, hundreds of in-house resources and hundreds of millions of dollars to invest in diversified privacy programs.
I was in the same room as you, maybe even sitting in the same room.
Were you confused by that statement? Because I was like, I appreciate you for being here. I'm not sure what you're saying is rooted in reality, but okay.
It's interesting to see where we are. They are following let's release the regulations at 5:00 on a Friday. So there's that. They're working together.
Consistent. That is
very similar.
Every Friday at 5 p.m., there's a new privacy interpretation, regulation, or rule released somewhere.
Indeed. Well, as a privacy officer, what might you offer to other privacy officers or companies who aren't as fortunate to have someone full-time in that seat? How to navigate all of these different, and let's just even focus on the US with these 5 different laws we're going to have here at the end of the year, with a very significant chance of having more coming in the next year or so. What are you doing that another company might be able to piggyback off of?
I think, if you do have someone, whether part-time or full-time, that's sort of tasked with implementing privacy controls at the company, I always encourage people to, especially like when I speak to non-privacy people, I'm like, make sure you support the person because they're probably having an emotional breakdown as we speak. There's too much to do. And like everyone has their own goals. And it's kind of interesting because I don't think any one role in any company is completely independent from others. So I always find I'm an independent contributor statement kind of funny. But when it comes to privacy, that's absolutely untrue. You're in the service of everybody else, and you kind of depend on everybody else to either follow the rules, implement, some recommendations, build the product the way you're suggesting, even though maybe they thought it would be better a different way. So I think just, beyond the dedicating budget or resources, there's a meaningful, let's make sure that everyone in the company is taking into account how hard these people work and like trying to help them to get to a solution. A lot of the time, people that work in privacy really are just trying to find the best possible option. It doesn't have to be my way or the highway, but like help me find where we're going because I don't know if you don't help me out. If you don't have a privacy resource and maybe you rely on outside counsel or outside consultants, I think the best thing you can do for yourself is to invest meaningful time in explaining to the consultant or the outside counsel what your company does, especially if you're in tech. I think there's a tendency to think, oh my God, outside counsel works on billable hours. I don't want to spend 6 hours explaining to them how my product works because that's time that I'm paying for that I should be getting privacy advice. But even the most practical outside counsel is going to have a really hard time giving you good advice that is not just conservative and generic if they don't understand what you're doing. So if you enable them to understand what you're doing, then they'll most likely give you meaningful advice that you can realistically implement.
So for a company who's new to creating a privacy program, particularly companies that have no in-house legal role, in your opinion, where should they start?
I think assessing where your data is and what it is helps you figure out even like which laws apply to you. I think one of the funny things that I hear a lot as well up until CCPA, there were no privacy laws in the US. There were a gazillion privacy laws in the US, like hundreds of them. If you look at some cities like Chicago had their own privacy biometrics law. So understanding what kind of information you use is really important. And I think that's a step that you should take before you go and seek out advice, right? Because that'll enable you to give meaningful information to an attorney, to a consultant. Just come up with, this is a summary of what we do. This is how we do them. This is the data we rely on. This is how long we keep it. This is why we keep it that long. I feel like a lot of the time, maybe we overthink a lot of the privacy work. We think that it's like super complicated, but the basis of any privacy assessment is really like, what data do you have? What do you use it for? How long do you keep it? Which is pretty, non-legalese questions. Finding the answer is always entertaining, but
it's always fun to hear other people say what I say all day about data. And you even did it with your hands in the bucket. It's exactly, It's so refreshing to have me not be the only person who has the same view.
Honestly, when I started at my old company, they'd never had a privacy person before. So they relied on outside counsel all the time. And the one thing that I heard all the time was, they don't give us meaningful advice, right? Everything is so difficult to implement. It's so strict. It's so out of our reach. And I'm like, well, what did you tell them about what you do? Because if you're just telling them we have health related information about employees, and we report on it to employers, like if that's how you portray it, they're going to go to 10. But if you actually say, oh, actually, we never share the health related information, we share aggregate information about how often people engage in physical activity, but you never know who, that was what was getting reported on. And that detail makes all the difference.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about GDPR and the advertising industry and some of how the changes and interpretations are coming. Can you share a little bit about where DoubleVerify fits in the ecosystem, and then how you're seeing the impacts of all these different interpretations affect what you all are doing and maybe what you're seeing in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, look, DoubleVerify is in what I call a safer area of ad tech. We do measurement. We rely on very little personal information. All we have is IP address. So compared to some companies out there, we definitely have less exposure to a lot of these laws and rules. I mean, the really complex aspects of a lot of these US-based rules right now revolve around the concept of behavioral advertising, targeted advertising. We don't participate in that. What DV does is measure the performance of an ad in an ecosystem. So whether or not the ad was displayed in the correct geography at a very high level. So we don't know exactly where you are. We just know that you're in New York State and we're advertising, or someone is advertising for a restaurant in New York State. That makes sense. If you were in Oregon, it probably wouldn't. And then we offer a lot of products that are non-PI related. For example, we offer an alternative to behavioral advertising, which is contextual advertising, or as I like to call it, Mad Men advertising, which is, I want to advertise this really fancy suit shop. I'm probably going to do it in, I don't know, the financial section of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, because that's where most likely people that buy suits are going to be looking at, or the kind of content they're going to be reading. So that's the kind of advertising that we used to see a long time ago that is totally unrelated to personal data. So that puts us in sort of I like to say an easier position, but it also sort of charges us with a lot of responsibility, because we offer an alternative to some of the more, I guess nowadays, at-risk forms of advertising. It comes at a price, in the sense that we have to spend a lot of time distinguishing ourselves from other companies. I think the ad tech industry, especially with all the changes in privacy, it's going through a really complex phase. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out where it's going to go. I think it's kind of impossible to figure out where it's going to go. So I always when I talk to my colleagues from other companies, I'm like, I feel like the most important thing to do for us is to give ourselves grace, because things may change in 3 weeks and we thought it was going to be one thing and suddenly it's going to be another, and you just got to be nimble. And the same happens for our engineering and product teams. Like, you're giving them guidance in one direction and then something suddenly changes. You have to sort of, be ready to change direction along with the privacy team. I think we're kind of at a turning point as a society to kind of figure out, like, how do we want the internet to work? How is it going to get funded? Because it costs money to run the internet, and all this content that we deem valuable costs money. Some companies have paywalls, some companies don't, but there's a lot of free content out there, and a lot of that free content is paid for by advertising. I think there have been some bad actors that have done some pretty shady stuff that have given a lot of companies a really bad name. Once bad things start to happen, you start of like looking around with a lot of suspicion, and you're like, are you doing the same thing? Are you doing the same thing? That's not necessarily true. The flashlight app comes to mind, where we found out that they were tracking your GPS location at all times. Why? Unclear. But they were doing it. So when something like that happens, now you're like, well, does everybody do that? Should we just assume everyone is tracking everything I do? So I think a lot of the push and pull that we're seeing in the laws and the decisions out of Europe and the US is just we're trying to figure out where we are and what's going to happen next. But there's going to be sort of there's a policy decision that I think needs to be made first about whether or not we're okay with the way the internet works today. And if we are, maybe the key is education and helping people understand what happens to their data better. And if we're not okay, then it's going to be a big shift, and we're going to have to figure out how we manage the internet without advertising, or with very limited advertising.
Well, Beatrice, didn't you just hit the nail on the head right there? As we talk about potential more state privacy laws, there's a federal one being considered. Do lawmakers and the general public, do they even really understand what it means when you give an email, and how companies can put together all this data to create a really detailed profile about you? I think the answer is they absolutely do not understand, because if they did, I think privacy policy would look a whole lot different.
Yeah, I think in general, the average person probably doesn't. I was in privacy for years before moving over to the ad tech world, and I didn't. Like, I knew conceptually that data is collected when I'm on the internet, everything I do. Everything you do walking around, like you take the highway, data is collected when you pay for your highway. Like, it's data everywhere. So I knew that in sort of a vacuum. I didn't necessarily fully understand how pervasive it is, how some practices really can influence people's behavior. Maybe I underestimated it myself. So I think it's always a learning experience. I do think that somehow, though, the world has evolved and we haven't really kept up with it from like a very basic level. So like when I was a kid, we were going to school, we were being taught how to type on a computer. Why? Because we no longer were typing on typewriters. Like that was just why they were preparing me to be able to go to college and then work in a corporate environment where I was going to be required to work with computers. We don't do, to my knowledge, on a broad scale, any meaningful education to children about data. We kind of rely on parents, I assume, to educate their children about data, and the average person doesn't understand it themselves. So I think introducing some concepts around that at an earlier age would probably be extremely valuable. I think the challenge with education is privacy policies are oftentimes contain a lot of really good information. It's just they're really complicated. The internet is really complicated. Technology is really complicated. So even when you make really concerned efforts to write documents that explain to people how stuff works, do they read it? Is it too long? But then if it's not, like if you don't explain everything, are you really providing the level of detail that enables someone who's not familiar with the internet to understand what you're doing? It's just, I think there's an underlying lack of understanding on how data is harvested and combined, and that influences the average person's inability to fully understand what a company, even a rather transparent company, might be sharing about what they do. And I think that's a pretty deadly combo. Like you're going in with no understanding and the concepts are too complicated. How could you understand? Like who's going to spend 4 hours on a Saturday trying to like comb through a privacy notice, trying to figure out exactly what it means? Like not the average person, other than Jody, as I see you.
If it's a certain smart bed.
Wait, the privacy notice for sleep number, is that the one?
We have read their privacy notice in detail before.
And discussed it with the marketing person who thought that we were nuts for asking, well, if you collect all this data on my REM sleep, what do you do with it? Oh, we're a big company. We have it taken care of. Oh, really? It was funny.
We just got a sleep number bed and my husband was setting it up while I was doing something else. And after he set it up, he ran out and he was like, I turned off all the data collection. Are you proud of me?
See, we're not the crazy people.
I'd love to have a coffee with him and discuss because you know what I call this person? The damsel who is often distressed over corporate data collection policies.
It's funny because I have kind of reached the point where I don't read privacy notices anymore. I'm just kind of like, well, I want to use the services. I want to do this. So.
Well, that raises the interesting conundrum, which is kind of the how much data is someone willing to give for the convenience of what the service or the product that they're receiving in return. And that's the balance. There might be a place where it would be too much if you understood what was happening and you would care. But there's kind of this middle ground where if it's not too egregious, then you're willing to have that balance. But at some point it might teeter the other direction. If they, if you turned it all off and there's still a secret back door that they're able to collect it, you probably wouldn't be okay with that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that maybe our discourse is missing a little bit. Like, I feel like a lot of the time we're having a conversation where it's either companies shouldn't collect any data, like this is all bad, or behavioral advertising just shouldn't exist. It's terrible. Sometimes I feel like we're like taking autonomy away. Like, what if I like behavioral advertising? Like, I wouldn't have bought this purse. My husband probably would be thrilled, but I really like it. And I'm so glad that it came to me in this email.
I think that's an important piece because I came to privacy from the ad tech arena. And nowadays there's certain advertising where I want certain advertising, they don't want others. And the company won't let me turn it off. It's an all or nothing.
No.
I speak about it all the time and I still will make the company remain nameless. Maybe they'll hire me one day, but it drives me crazy because they haven't moved up as we have evolved in our life. I went different stages and it's either an all or nothing. I can't pick anything. Or if I'm searching, I too have found some really interesting products because the advertising was appropriate. But like you had shared before, unfortunately, there's some bad actors who are always doing something that they shouldn't be. And I say it all the time. It's like we're in kindergarten again. It's the same thing. One or two people do something they're not supposed to. Now we have a long list of rules that we have to adhere to. But I don't think it should be an all or other. I think it should be a way that is meaningful to the person to be able to choose what it is that they want. If I don't want to watch ridiculous infomercials or terrible TV, I don't pick that channel. I pick a different channel. So you can't count that I watched that channel because I didn't pick that one. I picked what I want. If I don't want to open the direct mail that you sent me, I'm not going to open it. But maybe I want it to be easier to not receive certain pieces and to receive something else. And that it's an all or nothing. And it's incredibly complicated as to where we've landed.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely change over time. I think companies are becoming more sophisticated. My genuine hope, and like this is my un-European thing to say, like when I talk to my old colleagues from Europe, they're always like, you become so Americanized. I'm always like, well, there's a reason why in the top, I think it's Fortune 500 companies, there's only one EU-based tech company. It's not completely unrelated to the kind of scrutiny and hurdles that companies have to go through that maybe here are easier. And there is something to be said for encouraging innovation. It does like bring value to the world and to society. It's just finding the balance is always the difficult thing to do.
Well, on that note, as we like to ask all our guests, what is your best privacy tip?
I am a big fan of keeping privacy as fun as I can. So I invest a lot of time that some people could define as wasted, but I find very helpful in coming up with silly ways to engage my teams, like my company as a whole, in doing different privacy related activities. So for Data Privacy Day last weekend, we did a privacy wordle that we came up with for the team. Last year, we did a crossword puzzle. First 3 people to finish it got a one of those markers to like black out information on your mail before you throw it out. We do quarterly privacy movie nights. We're going to do our first in-person one in February. So we're all going to watch Minority Report and talk about all the privacy and security themes in Minority Report. So that's my thing, because like there's a lot of really obvious stuff that I think a lot of people can tell you, like, oh, find the, common denominator across laws, build a privacy program that baselines around it so that you're only tweaking details. And that way you have a consistent program across all of your offices. Like, I didn't invent that. I don't know if I invented privacy movie night, but I've brought it to every company I've worked in. So.
That sounds fun. Are you bringing the popcorn cookies?
We have a popcorn machine coming.
Would you like to have privacy movie night?
Privacy cookies were really popular last week. Privacy movie night. Sure, we could have privacy movie night.
Okay.
That sounds fun.
I have a whole list of like 15 different movies I can show you.
Oh,
You can pick from the 50s to today.
There you go. You can start.
yes, please send me the list. We'll see if it passes her rigorous requirements for certain.
They're
things.
not all like amazing movies, I'm not gonna lie, but my all-time favorite for privacy movie night is Gattaca.
Gattaca.
1997. Really good cast. Strongly recommend.
We look forward to the list.
Unfortunately, it was released a couple months before Titanic, so it didn't really make the headline.
Well, when you're not building cool privacy games and identifying your privacy movie night, what do you like to do for fun?
As mentioned before, I'm a big Star Wars person. I'm kind of like a nerdy person in general. Like, I love Lord of the Rings and I love Star Wars. And I'm very committed to the Star Wars thing. I have never watched Star Trek. I know that's offensive to some people, but I'm very committed to it. And I really love sports. I have a sports management degree. I've worked as a tournament organizer at tennis tournaments. I have traveled ridiculous distances, including Australia, to go see tennis tournaments. I love the Celtics. I live in Boston.
That's the basketball team.
I'm aware.
Are you sure?
Yes, I am. I got that one.
Oh,
I grew up in Connecticut and we didn't really have a team. So therefore Boston became our team.
yes. Well, I know you have.
I have a friend of mine that always because I'm not a I was never a really big basketball fan until 3 years ago, maybe. And I have this friend of mine who constantly makes fun of me. And he's like, do you want to know why you love basketball so much? And I'm like, why? And he goes, Jason Tatum is really hot. That's why you love it. I always like, well, how did you come up with that? Why? And he goes, seriously, though. And he starts sending me photos. And I'm like, yeah, he is cute.
Huh, I thought you would say because internationally, it's by far the most known and best marketed league around the world.
I'm going to disappoint you on that because when I was living in Italy, the one sport that I watched religiously and woke up in the middle of the night for other than tennis was baseball.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
I still love it.
Because that's the one sport that's in deep trouble because of 4.5 minutes before, they hit the ball. And anyway, I played baseball in college. I love the game, but
it's great. We live just across Fenway, so we go to a lot of games every year.
Well,
I don't know about this year because I don't know if the Red Sox are going to have a full team to field after selling everybody off.
Right.
We'll see.
Okay.
But yeah, the one American sport that I can't get behind is American football. If for no other reason, because you can't call it football, you barely hit it with your feet.
That's an excellent point.
Well said. If people would like to connect with you and learn more about your tennis interests or baseball or basketball, or perhaps in privacy,
Yeah.
where could they go?
They can go to my LinkedIn. I have a chatty LinkedIn profile where I talk about sports a lot, not as much about privacy, going to be honest. Probably should talk more about privacy on my LinkedIn. I sometimes make funny connections between sports and privacy. For example, the fact that we know a lot about athletes. Like, we know everything about their recovery, how often they work out. It's kind of funny. That's really my favorite kind of social media. I don't tweet. I have an Instagram, but it's a personal one. So LinkedIn is my place. My husband calls me my favorite social media platform, which he thinks is funny. He's a TikTok person. So.
I am not a TikToker. No TikToking here.
No dancing on
No dance. I like to dance, but no,
okay. It's not on
TikToking.
TikTok. Okay.
No TikToking. So we are so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you for sharing your story, your insights, and we're most appreciative.
Thank you so much for having me. So nice.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.